So today I want to discuss something that I think is one of the most important patterns in all of human history. And once you understand this pattern, everything happening right now in the Middle East will make complete sense to you. The pattern is this. Every great empire that has tried to conquer Iran, Persia, has either collapsed, retreated, or been permanently weakened. Every single one, without exception. And I want to argue today, using game theory and structural history, that America is next. So let's begin. Let's go back and look at history carefully, because history does not repeat itself exactly, but as Mark Twain said, it rhymes. And in the case of Iran, it rhymes very, very loudly. First, Alexander the Great. Everyone knows Alexander. He conquered Egypt, Mesopotamia, and Persia, which is today Iran. And people say, wait a minute, didn't Alexander actually win? Didn't he conquer Persia? Yes, he technically conquered Persia, but what happened next? He died at 32 years old. His empire immediately collapsed, his generals fought each other, the Macedonian Empire was finished, and in its place, who rose to power? The Parthians, Iranians, who then controlled the Middle East for the next 500 years. So the lesson here is simple. You can temporarily defeat Iran, but Iran defeats you in the long run. Second, the Roman Empire. The Romans were the greatest military power of the ancient world. Nobody came close. And the Romans fought the Parthians, the Iranians, for over 300 years. Julius Caesar planned to invade Persia, but was assassinated before he could. Emperor Cassus invaded and was destroyed at the Battle of Carrhae in 53 BCE. One of Rome's greatest military defeats. Emperor Trajan invaded and technically won, but immediately had to retreat because of uprisings everywhere. Emperor Julian invaded in 363 CE and died in battle. 300 years of war, and what happened to Rome? Rome fell, while Iran, the Sasanian Persian Empire, was still standing. Third, the Arab Caliphate. People often forget this, but the Arabs did conquer Iran in the 7th century CE. Yet, what happened? Iran absorbed the Arab conquerors. The Persians converted to Islam, yes, but they transformed Islam into something distinctly Persian. They gave the world Persian art, poetry, philosophy, and science. Within a few centuries, Iranian dynasties like the Biadids, the Samanids, and the Safavidids were ruling again. Iran was never truly conquered. It absorbed its conquerors and made them Iranian. Fourth, the Mongols. This is perhaps the most dramatic example. The Mongols in the 13th century were the most destructive military force in human history. They destroyed Baghdad, wiped out cities across Central Asia, and killed millions. And yes, they conquered Iran. But again, what happened? The Mongol conquerors converted to Islam, adopted Persian culture, and became Persians. The Ilkhanate, the Mongol rulers of Iran, became patrons of Persian art and literature. Iran absorbed the Mongols. Fifth, the Soviet Union. More recently, in the 20th century, the Soviet Union occupied northern Iran twice, once during World War I and once during World War II. Both times, they were eventually forced to leave. In 1946, Stalin refused to withdraw Soviet troops from northern Iran. This was one of the first crises of the Cold War, and the Soviets were eventually forced out. A nuclear superpower forced out of Iran. So, this is the pattern. Let me be very clear about this because I want you to understand it deeply. Iran is not just a country. It is a civilizational force. It has been continuously inhabited for over 3,000 years. It has one of the oldest continuous cultures in the world. And throughout all of history, every empire that has tried to permanently subjugate Iran has failed. The empires fell, Iran survived. Now I want to go deeper. I want to use game theory and structural analysis to explain why this pattern exists, because this is not just luck or geography. There are specific structural reasons why Iran defeats empires. Reason 1, strategic depth. Iran is a very large country, 4 times the size of Iraq, with a population of 90 million people. It has the Zagros Mountains in the west, the Alborz Mountains in the north, deserts and difficult terrain everywhere. Napoleon famously said, "Never march on Moscow." He could have also said never march on Tehran. Conquering Iran would require at minimum 3 to 4 million soldiers. The entire active United States military is about 1.3 million, so the math simply does not work. There is no scenario in which America has enough soldiers to control Iranian territory. None. Reason 2, the inverted military pyramid. This concept is very important. In a normal military, you have a cost pyramid. At the base, the biggest group, you have infantry soldiers. They are cheap, flexible, and can go anywhere. Above them, you have armor and tanks. Above that, naval power. And at the very top, the most expensive and least flexible, you have air power. Wars are usually wars of attrition. To win a war of attrition, your cheapest and most flexible resource, soldiers, must form the base of your strategy. That is how every successful empire in history fought. But America has an inverted pyramid. Air power is at the base. Everything is built around air power. Why? Because of the military-industrial complex. Air power is the most expensive, generates the most contracts, and makes the most money for Boeing, Lockheed Martin, and Raytheon. So the entire American military strategy is built around selling expensive weapon systems, not around winning wars. That is why you have the F-35 fighter jet at $100 million each, taking 26 years to develop, and the Iranians shoot one down. That is why you have the Gerald Ford aircraft carrier at $13 billion, and it has to run away from the Persian Gulf 3 weeks after arriving. That is why you have the Patriot missile system. Billions of dollars and cheap Iranian drones fly right past it. The American military is not designed to win wars. It is designed to generate profit for the military-industrial complex against Iran. This is catastrophic. Reason 3, asymmetric cost exchange. This is perhaps the most devastating strategic reality facing America right now. I want you to really understand this because this is how Iran destroys empires today. Not with swords or horses, but with mathematics. Consider this. One Iranian drone costs $50,000. One American interceptor missile costs between $3 million and $10 million, depending on the system. So every time Iran launches one drone and America tries to shoot it down, America spends at minimum 60 times more money than Iran. 60 times. Now, Iran does not shoot one drone. Iran shoots hundreds of drones simultaneously, overwhelming American air defenses. We saw a single Iranian ballistic missile being targeted by 11 different American interceptors. All 11 missed. That is tens of millions of dollars in American ordnance gone to stop one missile. America is racing to accomplish its mission before it runs out of interceptors. Let me say that again. The most powerful military in human history is racing against the clock before it runs out of weapons. That is the reality of this war. And this is ancient Persian strategy. You do not fight the empire head on. You bleed it slowly. You drain its resources. You exhaust its will. This is what the Parthians did to Rome for 300 years. This is what the Iranians are doing to America today. Reason 4, the will to fight. This brings us to perhaps the most important strategic factor of all. I want you to understand something about Iranian civilization. This is not just a government fighting a war. This is a civilization that has been fighting for its survival for 3,000 years. In Iranian eschatology, in their religious understanding, this war against America and Israel is literally a war against the great Satan. This is existential. This is sacred. In any war, you need 3 things: unity, capacity, and determination. Iran has all 3. What about America? Only 40% of Americans support this war. The administration is asking for a $20 billion war budget from a Congress that is deeply divided. The Pentagon is afraid to report casualties because of political backlash. American soldiers are dying and the government is hiding the numbers. The contrast could not be more stark. On one side, you have a civilization that has been preparing for this war for 20 years, studying American tactics, building drone factories, mapping every American base in the Middle East. On the other side, you have an administration that had no plan beyond the initial bombing and assumed Iran would simply surrender. They did not expect Iran to fight back. That is the level of hubris, of arrogance that we are dealing with. Now, I want to discuss something very important. War is not just fought on the battlefield. War is fought across 4 dimensions: the military dimension, the economic dimension, the political dimension, and the narrative dimension. Here is the key insight. America is trying to make the political, economic, and narrative dimensions conform to its military strategy. Iran is using its military strategy to shape the political, economic, and narrative dimensions. These are completely opposite approaches, and Iran's approach is far more sophisticated. America's strategy is simple: bomb Iran into submission, force a surrender, install a friendly government, control the oil. That is the entire plan. To make this work, America needs the economy to stay stable, allies to stay loyal, and the media to stay supportive. But what is actually happening? The economy is being disrupted. Oil prices are threatening to go above $100 a barrel. Larry Fink, the head of BlackRock, the largest asset management company in the world, the man who controls trillions of dollars, went on the BBC and said, paraphrasing, that if Iran maintains control of the Strait of Hormuz, we could see $150 oil for years. That means global recession. The head of the world's largest investment firm is on the BBC, warning about recession because of this war. That is not a stable economy supporting military strategy. That is an economy being held hostage by Iranian military strategy. Iran's strategy is completely different. Iran's military moves are calibrated to achieve economic, political, and narrative goals simultaneously. They control the Strait of Hormuz, but strategically, Chinese ships pass freely because China is Iran's main oil buyer. Friendly nations like Qatar and Oman are accommodated. This is not random aggression. This is precise, calculated geopolitical leverage. Politically, Iran is splitting the Gulf states. Qatar and Oman are moving away from the American position. Even Saudi Arabia and the UAE, who wanted regime change in Iran, are now watching nervously as their water supplies and food imports are threatened. Narratively, Iran is winning global opinion. Large numbers of Americans are openly rooting for Iran in this war. That is extraordinary. That has never happened before in an American war. And it tells you everything about how the narrative dimension is going. Now, I want to discuss something even more important. This war is not just about Iran. It is about the entire architecture of American global power. At the center of that is the petrodollar system. Here is how it works. Since 1973, almost all oil in the world has been traded in US dollars. This was agreed between America and Saudi Arabia. The Saudis would sell oil only in dollars, and America would protect the Saudi regime because everyone needs oil. Everyone needs dollars. This creates permanent global demand for the US dollar, which allows America to print money, run deficits, and finance its empire. Without the petrodollar system, America cannot afford its military. Without its military, America cannot maintain its empire. Now, what is happening in this war? The Strait of Hormuz, which Iran is now effectively controlling, carries 20% of the world's oil supply. Iran is demonstrating to the world that it, not America, controls the flow of Middle Eastern oil. Every day that this continues, the credibility of the petrodollar system is weakened. The Gulf states, the linchpin of that system, are under direct threat. The GCC gets 90% of its food imports through the Strait of Hormuz. Desalination plants, which provide 60% of GCC freshwater, are vulnerable to $50,000 Iranian drones. If those plants are hit, cities of 10 million people run out of water in 2 weeks. The Gulf states are terrified. A terrified Gulf state that can no longer guarantee its own survival may no longer be willing to recycle petrodollars into American stock markets and AI data centers. If that stops, the AI bubble bursts. The American financial Ponzi scheme unravels. This is how Iran destroys empires, not by conquering them, but by making the cost of empire unsustainable, by making the financial architecture of empire collapse from within. We have precedent for this. The Soviet Union did not lose the Cold War because America defeated it militarily. It lost because the cost of maintaining empire became unsustainable. Afghanistan was part of that. Iran may be America's Afghanistan on a much larger scale. Now, I want to address why America cannot adapt to this situation. You might ask, if the situation is this bad, why doesn't America change strategy, negotiate, or find an exit? The answer is that the quality of American governance has collapsed. China just completed its 15th five-year plan, involving 2 years of consultation, expert committees, think tanks across the country, and leading academic specialists. It is a detailed, serious, comprehensive plan for the future of 1.4 billion people. What does America have? The State of the Union has become a television show. There is no work program, no strategic plan, no analytical framework. The tariff war of 2025, which disrupted the global economy, was produced by 4 or 5 people with a one-page document that would not pass a first-year economics student. This is the same administration that decided to bomb Iran. No plan beyond the initial strikes, no strategy for what comes after, just an assumption, a delusional assumption that Iran would simply surrender. Compare this to Iran. Iran has been preparing for this war for 20 years. 2 decades of planning. They analyzed the American military, mapped every American base, built drone factories, studied the psychology of American decision-making. They understood that America's political will is fragile, that America's manufacturing capacity is limited, and that America fears casualties above all else. They built a strategy around exactly those weaknesses. This is the difference between a civilization that has survived 3,000 years by learning from every attack and adapting, and an empire that has been dominant for 80 years and has forgotten how to think seriously about strategy. Let me now bring this all together. I want to give you my prediction not as prophecy, but as an analytical framework based on structural history and game theory. I have made 3 predictions since 2024. First, Trump would win. That happened. Second, America would go to war with Iran. That happened. Third, America will lose this war, and this will forever change the global order. That is what I believe is happening now. Let me be precise about what I mean by lose. I do not mean that Iran will defeat America on the battlefield in a traditional sense. Iran cannot do that. America is still the most powerful military in the world. What I mean is this: America will find that the cost of continuing this war in money, political will, casualties, global reputation, and economic disruption will become unsustainable. America will be forced to retreat from the Middle East. When that happens, when the American empire retreats, 2 regional powers will remain: Israel and Iran. The Middle East will be reorganized around those 2 powers. Here's the deeper historical truth that I want to leave you with. Every empire falls. That is the lesson of history. Rome fell. The Mongol Empire fell. The British Empire fell. The Soviet Empire fell. Not because they were defeated militarily in one decisive battle, but because they overextended, because they could not sustain the cost of empire, because their internal contradictions, corruption, loss of purpose, and hubris caught up with them. America is experiencing all of these things right now. A military designed to generate profit rather than win wars. A government that cannot plan beyond the next news cycle. A political system so corrupted that $2 trillion disappears from the Pentagon budget and nobody is held accountable. A financial system so fragile that it depends on Gulf state petrodollars recycled into a stock market bubble. And Iran, ancient Persia, is simply doing what it has always done. It is waiting. It is bleeding the empire slowly. It is being patient, because Iran has time. Iran has always had time. Iran has survived every empire that has ever attacked it, and it will survive this one too. Alexander the Great came to Persia, and his empire died with him. Rome fought Persia for 300 years and fell. The Mongols conquered Persia and became Persian. The Soviets occupied Iran and were forced out, and now America. The graveyard of empires is not Afghanistan. The graveyard of empires, the original, the oldest, the most patient, is Iran. That is my analysis for today. This is not prophecy. This is structural history combined with game theory. I want you to keep your minds open. I want you to question everything I have said. I want you to look at the evidence and think for yourself. That is what predictive history means.